Welcome. Tonight's story is shared in a gentle voice. Take a deep breath, and let's begin part 1. Hi, I'm Chloe Benton. I'm 27, and if you asked me last year what I thought of my family, I'd probably smile and say we were close, just a bit complicated like every family is. But now? Now I see things I never dared admit before. This story isn't just about my grandfather, it's about what happens when someone is quietly erased from a family, one airport chair at a time. It happened last December. We were all flying to Arizona for my cousin's winter wedding. My dad, my mom, my younger brother, and my grandpa, Dad's father. Grandpa's name is George Benton. He's 81. Sharp mind, slow walker, heart that still beat strong but moved more carefully these days. He'd been living with my parents for 2 years since his fall, and even though he'd sometimes repeat himself or move a little slower, he was kind. Gentle. He still remembered to ask how I was doing at work, still smiled when I brought him lemon cookies, still folded his napkin just so at dinner. That morning at the airport, we were running a little behind. My dad gets tense in crowds, and I could tell he was already irritated with how slow Grandpa was walking. Just sit him somewhere while we check in, he muttered to my mom, and I froze a little at the tone, like Grandpa was luggage, not a person. We found an empty row of blue seats by the window. I was about to stay with him, but Dad waved me off. Go help your mom. I'll be quick. Then he turned to Grandpa, patted him lightly on the shoulder, and said the line I'll never forget. Just sit here, we'll be back after check-in. Grandpa nodded, smiled, and sat down with his hands folded neatly over his cane. We left. But somewhere between the check-in line and the security line, my parents' energy changed. My dad started walking faster, laughing at something my brother said, already talking about coffee and upgrades. I slowed down, looked behind me. Aren't we going back to get Grandpa? I asked. Dad didn't even look at me. He's fine. He knows where we are. He'll find us. He's 81, I said, trying not to sound sharp. He walks slow. My mom sighed. Chloe, he's not helpless. Just let your father handle it. But he wasn't handling it. No one was. We went through security. We walked all the way to the gate. Sat down. And still no one had gone back. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and said, I'm going to check on him. My dad didn't stop me. He just sipped his coffee. The airport was massive, and I had to backtrack through the entire terminal. 10-15 minutes passed before I reached that same spot by the window. And there he was. Still sitting exactly where we left him. Alone. Looking down at his hands. His smile was gone. I walked up slowly, heart aching, and said, Grandpa? He looked up and smiled again, faintly this time. I thought maybe I missed you, he said gently. No, Grandpa. You didn't. I reached for his arm. Come on. Let's go find the others. But as we walked slowly toward the gate, my stomach twisted. Because this wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't an accident. This was something colder. Something older. Something I'd been too naive to see until that moment. We made it to the gate with 15 minutes to spare, and Grandpa never said a word about being left behind. Not one. He just sat beside me quietly, his hands still on his cane, his eyes scanning the crowds as if he wasn't really seeing any of it. I glanced over a few times, hoping he'd say something. Joke. Complain. Anything. But he didn't. And when Dad finally saw us walking up, he barely reacted. There you are, he said, sipping his drink. Boarding in 10. That was it. No apology. No question about where we'd been. No acknowledgement. I looked at my mom. Nothing. I looked at my brother. He was on his phone. I helped Grandpa with his bag. I held his ticket. I walked with him slowly down the jet bridge, one step at a time, pretending not to notice how tired he looked. He didn't say he was tired. But I could see it in the way his back curled forward just a bit more than usual. In the way he blinked slowly as we moved through the plane, passing rows of eyes that didn't know or care what just happened. He got the window seat. I took the middle. My dad and brother were across the aisle. Mom was somewhere behind. As the plane took off, Grandpa finally turned to me and said, very softly, You're a good girl, Chloe. It was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. But I did. I looked at him and smiled, but something was already twisting in my chest. That feeling that something had shifted and wouldn't go back. After the wedding, we stayed in Arizona for 3 days. Son, family, a whole house rented with a pool and too many snacks. Everyone talked over each other. Everyone laughed. Grandpa mostly sat in the shade with a book. I noticed my dad didn't really talk to him. At night, Grandpa and I would play cards. Just the two of us. And he'd tell me stories about his old neighborhood, about Grandma, about the hardware shop he used to run. He had a way of remembering things that made you feel like you were there too. But on the second night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked into the kitchen for water and found my dad and uncle whispering by the fridge. My name came up. And Grandpa's. I stopped, listened. He's slowing everything down, Dad. Muttered. We can't do another trip like this. Chloe's too sentimental. You want to bring it up after the holidays? Yeah, Dad said. Time to put him somewhere with help. She'll fight it, but it's not her call. I stepped back before they saw me, heart pounding in my throat. Not her call. Like I didn't count. Like Grandpa didn't either. That was the moment I knew, this wasn't just about forgetting him at the airport. It was about quietly pushing him out. About convenience. About pretending kindness when it cost nothing but discarding him the moment it got hard. And I wasn't going to let it happen. The next morning I got up early, earlier than anyone else, and found Grandpa already awake in the kitchen, stirring sugar into his coffee with slow, practiced movements. He looked up at me and smiled faintly. You're always up early, he said, even though this was the first time I'd beaten him to it. I sat beside him and didn't say anything for a while. Just watched his hands, how steady they were, how calm. Finally I asked him, do you like it here? He paused, then shrugged. It's not about liking. It's about being where they want you. That line landed heavier than anything I'd expected. I nodded, pretending I didn't want to cry. Later that day, while the others were lounging by the pool, I asked Dad if I could talk to him. Just us. He looked annoyed, but followed me to the side yard where the noise of the party couldn't reach. You left him, Dad, I said quietly. At the airport. You left your father sitting alone for almost 30 minutes. He exhaled like I was being dramatic. He was fine. It wasn't fine. You're young, Chloe. You don't understand how exhausting it is. Then say that. But don't pretend he doesn't exist. He noticed, even if he didn't say it. He notices everything. My dad's jaw clenched. He was never around. For me growing up. You think I owe him some magical redemption now that he's old? That cracked something open. I stared at him, stunned. So this is punishment? It's balance, he muttered. He ignored me, I ignore him. That's how it works, right? No, I said, and my voice shook. That's not how I work. And I walked away. That night I stayed up with Grandpa again. He didn't talk much, just played solitaire while I pretended to read. At one point he looked up and said, your dad was a good boy once. I don't know what I did to lose him. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. The day we flew home, I insisted on sitting with Grandpa again. My dad didn't argue, he barely said 2 words the entire morning. Maybe he knew I'd overheard him. Maybe he didn't care. At the gate, Grandpa kept thanking everyone for the trip. Thanking them for the time, for the weather, for the food. He thanked my mom for the seat cushion she gave him. He thanked my brother for carrying his bag to the car. He even thanked my dad. And my dad just nodded without looking up from his phone. On the flight back, Grandpa fell asleep mid-sentence. I watched his breathing, slow and even, and I realized how quiet everything had become between us and them. There was a space now. Not loud or dramatic, but solid. A wall of unspoken words and things we both now understood, that love and presence aren't the same, that you can live in a house full of family and still be slowly disappeared. When we landed, I walked with him to baggage claim while my family rushed ahead like always. He paused by the carousel, looked around the crowd, and said, feels like I was somewhere else. I asked him what he meant, and he just gave me a soft smile. Like I was watching it all from a bench. And no one noticed I was still there. That line stayed with me the whole ride home. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, his face against the glass, eyes half closed, lips barely moving as if still telling himself stories no one had asked to hear. When we pulled into the driveway, I helped him out slowly. My dad didn't wait. He went inside. My mom followed, already on the phone. I held Grandpa's arm and walked him to the porch, step by step. When I opened the door for him, he stopped and turned to me. You'll tell the truth when I'm not around, won't you? He said. You'll remember I was here. I didn't say anything. I just hugged him, tighter than I ever had. Because that was the moment I knew this story was no longer about what had happened at the airport. It was about everything that came after. And everything I would do to make sure he'd never be left behind again. Sometimes the people we take for granted are the ones holding our family together in silence. Chloe saw what others refused to see, and what she chooses to do next will shake the entire family dynamic. Part 2 coming soon, and trust me, things are about to change. Part 2, what I did after they left him behind, again. It started with a list. I sat in my room that night after everyone had gone to bed, after Grandpa's soft footsteps had disappeared down the hallway, and I wrote down everything I'd seen since the trip began. Not for drama. Not to confront anyone. Just to keep a record. I listed what Dad said by the fridge. What Mom didn't say at the airport. How Grandpa waited 30 silent minutes in a sea of strangers. I wrote it all down because I needed proof, for myself. Proof that I wasn't imagining how easily a person could be erased. The next morning, while everyone was packing, I stayed with Grandpa in the kitchen. I made him coffee the way he liked it, 1 scoop sugar, 1 splash milk, stir counterclockwise. He smiled when I handed it to him, like it meant more than I'd ever understand. I asked him, casually, if you could live anywhere, where would you go? He looked up from his cup, surprised. You mean now? Yeah. He thought for a long time. Somewhere with books. And windows. And maybe a chair that doesn't squeak. We both laughed, but there was a sadness in it. I knew what he meant. Somewhere he didn't feel like a burden. Somewhere he could still be a person, not a problem. On the flight home, Dad didn't speak to either of us. Neither did Mom. My brother made some joke about me being dramatic, but I didn't react. I just kept my hand on Grandpa's arm during the turbulence and asked him if he wanted to play cards when we got home. He smiled. You'll let me win this time? I told him no. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor with my list, and for the first time I added something new, an idea. A plan. I had savings. I had time. And more than anything, I had clarity. If they were so eager to push him aside, then maybe I could pull him forward. Find him a better place. Not a facility. A home. Somewhere quiet, where someone knocked before entering, where meals were shared not delivered. I started making calls. The next morning. A former coworker of mine had a mother who ran a shared home outside the city, private and calm, for seniors who still wanted to live, not just exist. I scheduled a visit. I didn't tell my parents. Not yet. Grandpa came with me. We told them we were going out for lunch. He wore his best coat. I wore my calmest smile. And when we arrived, he just stared at the porch for a long time before saying, feels like a place that knows how to listen. We toured the rooms. They had a chess set in the common area, lemon bars on the counter, and 2 residents reading aloud from a novel by the fireplace. I looked at him. He was glowing. On the way home, I asked him what he thought. He didn't say much. Just took my hand in the car and held it the whole way back. I knew that meant yes. What I didn't know was how hard it would be to tell the family. Or how ugly things would get once they realized what I'd done. I waited until the weekend. Until I knew everyone would be home and no one could say they didn't have time to listen. I asked for 10 minutes. That's all. 10 minutes where they'd sit and hear what I had to say. Mom looked wary. Dad rolled his eyes. My brother didn't even look up from his phone. But they sat. I stood across from them in the living room, hand steady, voice calm, and said, I found a place where Grandpa can be treated like a human being. Not like an afterthought. Not like a burden. Silence. Then laughter, short, sharp, uncomfortable. Dad spoke first. You mean a nursing home? It's not a nursing home, I said, already feeling the heat rise in my chest. It's a shared home. Quiet, independent, respectful. He liked it. He's not making decisions like that, Mom said flatly. He's not incapable. I snapped back. He's been ignored, not erased. And who exactly gave you the right to start moving people around like this? Dad barked. He's my father. Not yours. And he's my grandfather, I said, now trembling but not backing down. And I'm the only one who's actually been listening to him. Mom stood. This is absurd. He lives here. This is his home. Really? I asked. Because nothing about the way you treat him feels like home. You leave him behind at airports. You don't ask how he's feeling. You don't even include him in conversations. You're being dramatic again, my brother mumbled. I turned to him. No. I'm being honest. Try it sometime. Dad stepped forward. He's not going anywhere. And if you try to interfere again, what? I asked. You'll ignore me too? The room went still. I think they finally saw it. Not just my anger, but my resolve. That I wasn't just some emotional girl clinging to nostalgia. I was a woman who saw the cracks they spent years pretending weren't there. And I wasn't going to unsee them. Grandpa was in the hallway. I didn't know how long he'd been standing there. But when our eyes met, he gave the smallest nod. The kind that says, it's okay. I heard enough. I see you. I walked over, took his hand, and said, let's go sit outside. And without another word, we left the room behind. We sat together on the porch in silence, Grandpa and I, watching the late afternoon light stretch across the lawn like it was trying to hold on to something. I could still hear the muffled tension. From inside, voices rising then falling like waves hitting a wall. He didn't ask what was said. He didn't need to. He just sipped his tea slowly, one hand still loosely curled around the cane resting between his knees. After a while he said, you didn't have to do all that for me. I looked at him. Yes, I did. He nodded, not arguing, just absorbing the weight of it like someone who'd learned long ago not to expect help but was still surprised. When it came, that night I helped him pack a small bag. Just clothes for a weekend trial, I told them. Just to see if it fits. Mom refused to speak to me. Dad slammed a door and stayed in the garage for hours. My brother texted me from the hallway. You've really lost it. But none of that mattered anymore. The next morning I drove Grandpa out to the shared home. The same place with the lemon bars, the quiet porch, the soft lamps that made the walls feel warm. He walked slower that day. Not from pain, but from something else, like he was afraid to trust that this peace might last. I showed him to his room, helped him fold his shirts into the dresser drawers, placed his old radio by the window. When we finished, he sat on the edge of the bed and looked up at me like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he had permission. You don't have to thank me, I said quietly. You just have to let yourself be happy here. He blinked fast, once, twice, then looked away. I don't remember the last time someone asked me what I wanted without expecting me to say, whatever's easier. That broke something in me. But I didn't cry. I just stood a little taller, adjusted the blanket over the corner of the bed, and said, you deserve to be someone's choice. Not their chore. When I left that day, I didn't feel guilt. I felt fury. Because now that I'd seen what was possible, the calm, the dignity, the kindness, I couldn't unsee the way my family had trained themselves not to notice him. Not to hear the way his voice got quieter when he realized no one was listening. Not to see how he'd sit through dinners like a guest in his own story. I called them on the way home. All three of them. No one picked up. I didn't leave a message. I just kept driving, one hand on the wheel, one on my list from weeks ago, the one I'd updated, rewritten, expanded. The one that would be very useful for what I planned next. Because moving Grandpa was never the end. It was just the start that I gave them 2 more days to reach out. 2 more chances to call, to ask where he was, to pretend they cared enough to fight for him. Nothing came. Not a message, not a knock, not even a passing, how is he doing? So I did what I knew I had to. I scanned every copy of his medication records, I took photos of the calendar where they'd skipped doctor visits, documented every conversation I'd written down in that journal since Arizona. I put it all in a folder labeled simply, ignored. I didn't know yet what I'd use it for, maybe legal backup if they tried to interfere, maybe just a reminder to myself that I hadn't overreacted. Maybe someday I'd hand it to Grandpa, so he'd know someone was keeping track. Meanwhile, Grandpa was changing. Not fast. But gently. His posture was straighter. His voice steadier. He started telling stories again, new ones. Not just memories of loss, but things like recipes he wanted to try or the funny habit of a neighbor who watered the lawn twice a day. He laughed. Really laughed. And when I asked if he wanted to visit his old shop in town, the one that closed years ago, he looked at me and said, only if you promise we'll get lemon bars after. That became our thing. A Saturday ritual. We'd drive past his old life, stop for something sweet, then sit under a tree while he told me truths I'd never been trusted with before. He told me about my dad as a boy. The sadness. The anger. The distance that grew like mold after my grandmother passed. He needed more from me than I knew how to give, Grandpa said one afternoon. And I think he never forgave me for that. I didn't respond. There wasn't a line sweet enough to erase all that. But I reached for his hand, and we just sat there while the sun sank behind the trees. That night, my phone buzzed. It was my dad. 1 missed call. No voicemail. Then a text, is he still with you? That phrasing. Not, how is he? Not, can I see him? Just, is he still with you? I didn't reply. I turned off my phone and looked across the room, where Grandpa was finishing a crossword, humming softly under his breath. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel torn. I felt sure. This wasn't betrayal. This was protection. This wasn't rebellion. This was repair. And no matter what came next, I'd already made the choice they never did, to stay. Chloe didn't wait for permission, she acted when it mattered most. And now that her grandfather finally has peace, the silence from the rest of the family says everything. But sometimes silence is just the calm before the storm. Part 3 is next, and trust me, they won't stay quiet for long. Part 3, I stayed. When they didn't. The text came 2 days later. From my mother this time. We think it's time to talk. You've made your point. That line made my stomach turn. As if this had all been some emotional tantrum I'd staged for attention. As if the man I loved more than most people in this world was a point to prove. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the shared home like I had every day that week, carrying a bag of oranges and the crossword book Grandpa liked. He met me at the door this time. No cane. No hesitation. Just a slow, steady smile that made me pause mid-step. I started writing again, he said, holding up a small blue notebook. Just thoughts. Little things I remember. We sat under the tree while he read aloud about a woman who used to bake honey bread next door to his childhood home. About a neighbor who fixed bikes for the kids and never charged a cent. About how grandma once dyed her wedding dress pink by accident trying to remove a coffee stain. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my tea. He laughed too, and that sound, it felt like home. Not the kind I grew up in, but the kind I wanted to build. Meanwhile, the texts kept coming. First polite. Then impatient. Then guilt-laced. You're turning him against us. He's confused. He belongs with family. That last one made me pause. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, reading it over and over. Then I typed back, so act like it. No reply came. But 3 days later, they showed up. All of them. Dad, Mom, and my brother, walking in like they'd been invited, their smiles forced, their eyes scanning for signs of betrayal. Grandpa was in the common room reading. I stood in their way. You can say hello, I said quietly, but you don't get to take over. Not anymore. My dad gave a tight-lipped nod. My mom looked like she was about to cry. My brother kept his sunglasses on. They approached him slowly, like he might break. Hey, Dad, my father said stiffly. How are you doing here? Grandpa looked up, measured them for a moment, then said, comfortable. The silence that followed was deafening. Not cruel. Not angry. Just, complete. They didn't know how to respond to that. Not when he didn't perform grief or loneliness for them. Not when he didn't fall into their arms grateful they finally noticed. He just went back to his book. That afternoon, as they left, my mother turned to me and said, "You've changed." I looked her in the eye. No. I just stopped pretending I hadn't noticed. She didn't respond. Just walked away. My brother paused on the steps and muttered, "You think you're better than us now?" I smiled, but it wasn't cruel. No. I think I listened when he spoke. And I closed the door. The weeks passed quietly after that. They didn't return. No calls. No letters. But for once, the silence felt like peace, not punishment. Grandpa finished his notebook. Then started another. We framed one of his old shop signs and hung it in his room. He started teaching a neighbor to play cards. On his 82nd birthday, we threw a small lunch under the tree with lemon bars, tea, and jazz playing softly from a Bluetooth speaker. He made a toast, not dramatic, just gentle. To being remembered while you're still here. I looked around. And realized something I hadn't dared hope for when this started. He was happy. Not tolerated. Not managed. Happy. And me? I stopped needing my family to approve. I stopped asking them to show up. Because I had. And that was enough. A week later I saw them again, unexpected, uninvited, standing outside the shared home as I pulled into the gravel lot. My parents and my brother, all dressed a little too nicely, like they thought presentation might buy them back into a story they'd abandoned. I didn't get out of the car right away. I just watched them through the windshield, watched how they fidgeted, how none of them looked at each other. When I finally stepped out, my mother spoke first. "We just want to visit," she said quickly. "That's all? No drama." I almost laughed. The irony of her using that word. But I nodded and walked them in, setting boundaries with my silence. Grandpa was in the back garden, feeding the birds. He looked up, saw them, and I felt him freeze for half a second, just a twitch in the corner of his mouth. Then he straightened, turned, and gave a small, polite smile. Not warmth. Not resentment. Just controlled neutrality. My father stepped forward like nothing had happened. "Thought we'd stop by. See how you're doing." Grandpa looked at him for a long moment, then said simply, "I'm well." The conversation that followed was thin, strained, full of vague questions and performative nods. My mom complimented the garden. My brother asked how the food was. My dad mentioned something about how good Grandpa looked. He did look good. Stronger. More grounded. More himself. But they said it like it was a miracle and not the result of being treated like a human being. After 20 minutes, Grandpa gently said, "I think I'll go inside now. Chloe can walk you out." And that was it. He didn't offer hugs. He didn't linger. He just turned and left them standing there like guests who'd overstayed. On the walk back to their car, my dad tried once more. "We can't change the past, Chloe. But maybe we could try again. Start over." I stopped and looked him dead in the eye. "Starting over doesn't work if you act like nothing happened." He opened his mouth, but I kept going. "He gave you decades. He waited. For you to see him. And you didn't. You still don't. You just want the guilt to go away. That's not love. That's cleanup." My mom flinched like I'd slapped her. My brother finally took off his sunglasses. "So what, you think you're the only one? Who cares now?" I looked at him. I think I'm the only one who stayed when no one else would. They didn't argue. They just got in the car and drove off, tires crunching over gravel like punctuation marks. I stood there long after they'd gone, watching the road until it settled again. Then I went back inside, found Grandpa folding laundry at the table, humming the same tune from his shop days. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't need to. He just glanced up, nodded once, and said, "Thanks for keeping the peace out there." I smiled, picked up a towel, and folded it beside him. Because, in this house, that was what we did now. We stayed. We showed up. We folded the pieces that others left behind. 2 months later, I mailed the list. The one I'd kept since Arizona. Not to shame them. Not to beg. Just to remind them, he was seen. Every date, every missed appointment, every moment they forgot to look back. I sent it in a plain envelope with no return address. I didn't expect a response. I didn't need one. Because by then, Grandpa had joined a book club at the home. He'd been asked to lead the Sunday crossword group. And last week, he gave a speech during the center's Family Appreciation Night. I watched him walk to the front of the room, dressed in a sweater I'd gotten him for his birthday, holding a note card he barely glanced at. "I used to think being quiet made me easier to keep around," he said. "But sometimes silence isn't grace. Sometimes it's just what people count on to get away with things." There was a pause. A few heads nodded. But mine didn't. Mine stayed still, eyes locked on his. Because I knew who he meant. Who he didn't name. And that was enough. That night, after everyone left, we sat outside under the porch light with a blanket and 2 mugs of tea. He looked at me and said, "Do you think I was a bad father?" It broke something in me. Again. But this time I was ready. "I think you were a hurt man who tried," I said. "And I think the people who made you feel like trying wasn't enough, they were wrong." He didn't cry. Neither did I. But the silence between us felt full instead of empty. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in my father's sharp, slanted script. Inside was one sentence: "We saw the list." That was it. No apology. No denial. Just acknowledgement. The smallest crack in their silence. And maybe that's all it would ever be. But I didn't write back. I didn't call. I didn't know them closure just because they'd finally decided to face their reflection. Instead, I spent the day with Grandpa picking out herbs for the garden bed we were building together, his idea. He wanted mint, rosemary, something called lemon balm. He was excited. Planning months ahead. Like someone who expected to be here. That night, I printed out a photo from the wedding in Arizona, the one where he's in the background, sitting alone near the shrubs while everyone else huddled for group shots. I placed it in a frame and left it on the kitchen shelf next to the lemon bars he'd started baking again. Because this story wasn't going to end with bitterness or blame. It would end with memory. With presence. With proof. That he mattered. That someone stayed. And that silence, when broken for the right reasons, could be the loudest kind of love there is. This is the final chapter of Chloe's story. A story I wrote from the ground up. Every word, every moment, every beat of emotion came from me. It's not adapted, not copied, not AI written fiction. The entire plot was created by me as the original author of this channel. The voiceover and visuals were generated using AI tools to bring my story to life, but the idea, structure, dialogue, and development are 100% mine. This is an original production made for this channel, and this channel only. Thank you for being here. If this story meant something to you, I've got more.